But it will, as you said before, benefit the right parts
Yes.
of the right in the end.
Oh, definitely, definitely. And because there's just no reason for the right not to capitalize on that. It's perfectly...
There's this unbelievable own goal that's being created, a horrific goal opening down the road here.
Yes, definitely. Well,
We can all see it coming.
Well, as soon as you allow, as soon as you say, well, yes, your group identity is paramount, then you allow people who say, well, not only is it paramount, it's superior. Well, that's not that much of a transformation of the perspective, especially when you're also saying to certain groups that you should be playing to lose. It's like, well, because anyone sensible is going to look at that and say, well, why shouldn't I play to win? If group identity is paramount, why shouldn't my group just win?
Those people you can identify as being on the far right these days, and the people that are, the few people that have got this massive press attention for being called alt-right, you notice one thing in particular with them: they flirt with the dangers of fascism. They flirt. You can see it when they're caught on video. They like to drop in terms that resonate. They flirt with fascism. They flirt with Nazism. And this is rightly something we pick up on, and our ears are attuned to it. In London, where we're sitting last week on a morning television chat show, a young woman who was invited on got into a row with the presenter, and he was portraying her because he supported Trump and she was anti-Trump. He said, well, you know, since you loved Obama so much, she said, I didn't love Obama, she says. And she says, I'm a communist. I didn't love Obama. I'm literally a communist, you idiot. And this, as we speak, has become not just enormously popular, but gigglesome on the left in this country. And I'm not talking about the far left. I'm talking about the left right up to and involved with Her Majesty's opposition. I'm literally a communist has just been made into a T-shirt by a group on the left, and they're selling it. And this in an era when we've been endlessly told, you know, the only thing you do if you see a fascist is to punch them in the face. And there seems to be, as I've always said, a supply and demand problem with the fascists. There aren't enough for the demand there seems to be to find them. But yet, here you have, live on television, I'm literally a communist, and it's unimaginable. We all know it's unimaginable that somebody would say, I'm literally a fascist on TV, and everyone would find it wonderful, and everyone would make I'm literally a fascist t-shirts. So this 20th century era, this educational era, seems to me to be having real world consequences of a kind that...
It's a catastrophe. It means that we learned half the lesson. We sort of learned half the lesson of the 20th century, right? And well, thank God we sort of learned half the lesson, but the other half has not been learned, and that's not acceptable, not in the least acceptable. Yeah, the idea that you can come, well, you know, the data in the United States indicates that 1 out of 5 social science professors are self-proclaimed Marxists. It's like, you're a Marxist? Really? Like, seriously? Yeah, not only am I a Marxist, it's one of the things that makes me morally virtuous. Well, what about the 20th century? Well, that wasn't real communism. It's like, and I know what that means. It's the most arrogant possible statement. What it means is that, well, you know, those people who tried it before, they didn't really have the same nuanced understanding of the sophistication of Karl Marx's revelation that I have, or the moral character that I have, so that if I had been placed in charge, let's say, of the Russian Revolution, the utopia, that was only a couple of decades away. That's what it means.
I once wrote about this with Eric Hobsbawm, the famous left-wing historian who just shortly before his death was asked in an interview by Michael Ignatieff that if it took another 20 million dead to have achieved full communism and the state he wanted, would it have been worth it? And he replied, yes, it would have been worth it. Again, unimaginable that this could happen in the opposite direction. But particularly unimaginable still this idea, even after the 20th century, that these Marxists, literally a communist people, still are standing on the piles of tens of millions of skulls, saying a bit more violence and we might yet get to utopia. It's an extraordinary...
Always one murder away from utopia. One more.
Again, just fascinating, fascinating conversation between these two men, Douglas Murray and Jordan Peterson. And as Douglas brings up, there's a lady that comes on TV, and this happens on our side of the pond too in the United States of America. Che. You got these college students at universities, they're all brandishing Che t-shirts with pride. They don't even have a freaking clue who Che was. Che. I mean, unbelievable. Pol Pot t-shirts. Marxist theory being taught. That's fine being taught, but as you know, Jordan was basically saying that 20% of the professors, 20%. Listen, even if you didn't even agree that the left leans, that the universities lean left by a majority, overwhelmingly, to say that 20% of the professors identify themselves as self-proclaimed Marxists and that they think that they know better than Karl Marx because they could have instituted communism and socialism better than it was. I mean, that was the wrong way of doing it. You know, they experimented, so they killed 100 million people. You know, they were just trying to get it right. And like the writer, I was not aware of that quote. I want to go read that book. If it had taken another 20 million to achieve the nirvana that supposedly would come under socialism or communism, yes, that would be worth another 20 million. This is how these people think, folks. This is their mindset. This is what is being taught in our schools. At least this type of, you know, under the cover, so to speak. But as Jordan Peterson also pointed out, they only talk about Nazism. They only talk about the horrors that Nazism and Hitler brought, which is, we need to talk about that. But not enough is placed on the horrors, the catastrophic loss of human life. And as Douglas so aptly put it, that the left stands upon the skulls of the hundreds of millions of souls that were decimated in evil perpetration of trying to achieve something that could never be achieved with an ism like communism or socialism. Anyways, folks, you're watching the Dr. Nasir Shaikh Show. I'm your host, Dr. Nasir, where I give you my political perspective from my political prescription, from my political perspective on what happens when all these things collide, when you got two great minds like Douglas Murray and Jordan Peterson, and they collide with social media, religion, politics, social sciences, all kinds of things, culture, policies, and they all come crashing together. That's what we have on tap for you today, and we're going to go right back to the interview between these two great minds right now.
Well, you know, and the way that the leftists defend themselves is by saying things like, well, what about all the deaths created by capitalism? You're not factoring them into the equation. And then, of course, the problem there is that most systems manifest themselves in various forms of bloody excess. And so how you tally up the bodies depends on where you draw the boundaries around your conceptual systems. And you know, if you include the entire history of the Western expansion into the New World, say, over the last 400 years, and you decide that that's a manifestation of Western capitalism, let's say, then, well, the tallies, I suppose, they look different.
And at the very least, you can say that the number of people raised out of poverty by capitalism is significantly higher than the number of people raised out of poverty by communism.
Well, this is. I think there's something crucial about that, because one of the things that we will have to contend with is something like that, which is that every system is, in some sense, a system of oppression and bloodshed. But some of them also produce a modicum of wealth and happiness. And I would say that that's the proper defense of what has been established as a consequence of the primacy of the individual in the conceptual schemes of the West, is our bloody oppressive system at least produces some modicum of wealth and well-being, whereas the communist system produced, if you're optimistic communist, no more deaths, which I believe is wrong, but zero wealth and a tremendous amount of collateral destruction. And so it could easily be that we're in a position where all we have to choose from is horrible systems, some of which do some things right now and then. And that would be our system. That would be the Western system. And I think there's plenty of evidence for that too, accruing evidence, because what's happening right now across the world is that as the idea of individual sovereignty and associated property rights and freedom of choice and so forth are increasingly instantiated in developing countries, those countries are moving away from conditions of abysmal poverty at a staggering rate. And so, like, the right-wing types have to admit that hierarchies do dispossess and that they have their elements of brutality about them. Even if they're functional hierarchies, even if they're competence predicated, they dispossess people. This is the cognitive problem in large part that's going to bedevil us over the next 20 years. But I mean, at least there are fewer people starving now. There are more people being lifted out of absolute poverty. Child mortality rates, child mortality rates in Africa now match those in Europe in 1950. It's like, that's cause for celebration. And we have halved the number of people in absolute poverty since the beginning of the millennium. And so I think we have to grow up and be realistic and say, well, yes, there are, all human systems of governance and organization are pathological to some degree. But some of them are minimally functional as well.
An optimistic, pessimistic note on which to finish. Thank you.